Hey, I'm Nancy Cavey. Welcome to the Social Security Disability edition of Winning Isn't Easy. Now, before we get started today, I have to give you a legal disclaimer. This podcast is not legal advice. The Florida Bar Association says I've got to say that, so I've done it. But nothing will ever prevent me from giving you an easy to understand overview of the Social Security Disability claims process, the games that are played, and what you need to know to get the disability benefits you deserve. The Social Security Administration uses a five-question test to determine your entitlement to benefits, which we covered a bit in our earlier episodes. This week, however, I'm going to be concentrating on step 3. And winning at step 3 means that you are awarded benefits without having to deal with the vocational issues of steps 4 and 5. So let's pay attention to see if you qualify. First, I'm going to talk today about the listing of impairments, the Social Security Blue Book. Secondly, I'm going to talk about how a Social Security Residual Functional Capacity Form can help you meet a listing at step 3. And lastly, I'm going to talk about what happens if you don't meet that listing and much more information you need to know about getting your benefits. So let's take a quick break before we get started.
Filing for Social Security disability, or has your claim been denied already? Either way, you require a copy of your rights to Social Security disability benefits, which will cover everything you need to know about the Social Security disability claims process. Request your free copy of the book at caveylaw.com today.
Welcome back to Winning Isn't Easy, the Social Security Disability version. Now, let's start at the beginning, if you will, or actually it's sort of the middle, if you will. Step 3, the listing of impairments and the Social Security Blue Book. Now, at step 3, the Social Security Administration is going to look at your medical records to determine if you have any medical condition that's severe enough to automatically entitle you to your benefits. The Social Security Administration uses a book called the Listing of Impairments, or the Blue Book. It's based on body systems. So I want you to think back to your high school biology. You studied the cardiovascular system, the pulmonary system, the gastroenterological system, the skeletal system, the immunological system, the neurological system, the nephrology system, and the genitourinary system. Boy, isn't that painful to think about that? There are listings for medical conditions for each of these body systems that are considered severe enough to meet a listing. So you need to understand that, for example, under the musculoskeletal listings, there are listings for back conditions, neck conditions, hip conditions, knee conditions, and feet conditions that can be considered so severe that you're entitled to your benefits. And those are the kinds of medical conditions that are common medical conditions that people will have. And similarly, there are common listings in the other body system listings. So let's get started by talking about what you need to know about these listings. And I will tell you, getting your Social Security benefits can be hard if you don't understand what it is you need to prove. This is like getting in a car and deciding that you're going to drive to New York City from Florida with no map or a GPS. You might get to New York City if you're lucky, but let's trade luck for knowledge here. So remember, the Social Security Administration is using the 5-step sequential evaluation. And at step 3, we need to determine whether or not you meet a listing based on the Blue Book. So you might want to actually Google this after our podcast. The Blue Book has 2 sections. There is the adult listing, Part A, and childhood listings, Part B. And we're only going to talk about Part A. If you have a medically determinable impairment that matches the list of impairments, you're going to be found disabled by Social Security under the medical guidelines. And if you can't, then we go on to the vocational issues at step 4 and 5. So at step 4, the issue is, can you go back to the lightest and simplest physically demanding job you did in the 5 years before your disability claim was determined? And if not, whether you are able to do other work in the mythical, hypothetical, not real world national economy in view of your age, education, skills, and restrictions and limitations. So let's talk more about the listings. When I'm speaking to a prospective client or dealing with a client, I always want to know what their medical conditions are, because I want to look at the medical listings. and you can qualify potentially on more than one listing. But to qualify for a medical listing, you have to meet the symptoms and the laboratory findings for each of the listed conditions. The Social Security Administration is going to be looking at those medical records, looking for those elements of the listing and kind of checking them off from your medical records. But the problem here is that your doctor did not take a class in medical school to learn how to write a report for Social Security purposes. The general problem is that there's not enough detail. But let's talk more about that detail. There are listings for body systems for cancer, cardiovascular system disorders, digestive system disorders, endocrine disorders, hematological disorders, immunological system disorders, mental disorders, musculoskeletal disorders, neurological disorders, respiratory disorders, skin disorders, and special sense disorders. Each one of these listings have different criteria. So you might, as I said, want to get out the blue book to see whether or not your medical condition has a listing, and if so, what the elements are. By the way, there is no listing for fibromyalgia. There's really no pure listing for POTS. So there are a number of medical conditions where, you've got a problem, but you're never going to meet the listing. And so we go on to steps 4 and 5. Now, let's give you an example. Social Security listing for musculoskeletal disorders covers the skeletal spine and the upper or lower extremities that affect the musculoskeletal system and radiculopathy caused by a disc. And that can be found under Disorders of the Spine, section 1.15. So you can look at the listing 1.00 and 1.15, and you can see there's a lot of information that's required. It's medically and factually complex, and it can be difficult to prove. Now, is there a catch to meeting the listing? Well, if you haven't figured that out, let me clarify that. Every listing has criteria that has to be established based on the medical records and documents in your file. If you don't meet that listing, as I said, we move on to 4 and 5. In my experience, I find it really rare that medical records will document each element of the listing simply because doctors didn't go to medical school to learn how to write a report, and they don't have the time to, or interest, quite frankly, to document those findings. So, do you meet a listing? Well, we get a copy of the medical records and we look at the applicable listing and we start checking things off. And it's a bit like a game. So we'll take the first element of the listing and review your medical records and highlight what criteria, if any, you meet as we check off the element. And you do that for every element of the listing. And if you have them all, congratulations. More likely than not, you meet a listing or have a listing level impairment. Now, if you're not represented by an attorney and you've gone through this listing level, you might want to make an appointment with your doctor and ask them to go through your medical records with them and ask them about any missing elements of the listing. Some doctors are not going to do this, so you need to check with their staff before you schedule an appointment. But you want to show the doctor the listing elements and what you found. Here they are, doctor, here's blah, 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 blah. Here's some missing elements. Do we have them? Do we not have them? Can you do testing that might document that I have these? Now, more often than not, doctors are not going to play this game with you, but if they do, that's great. The other thing we try to do is to get them to fill out a form called a residual functional capacity form. We lawyers have invented them. The doctors generally don't know about these forms unless they do a lot of Social Security work. And Social Security, of course, will never tell your doctors about these forms. When we are giving our clients the residual functional capacity form to take to the doctor, normally the first page or two has elements of the listing. So we're kind of trying to get the doctor to back in, if you will, to the listing level questions. The more practical solution to this problem is to hire an experienced Social Security attorney who's going to review your records and ultimately determine if you meet the listing. And if not, then of course, we want to try to get that residual functional capacity form that the doctor will fill out to address the element listings. You can see that it takes teamwork to get your Social Security benefits. Got it? Let's take a break.